Second, it was about the other challenges that we were dealing with, right? Kashmir was not the only problem. We had massive poverty, socio-economic problems. Our agriculture had been destroyed. People didn't have basic food to survive. There was famine in several parts of the country, right? We didn't have basic services. There were insurgencies. There were other princely states which were not ready to join India. We had many pressing problems. We had just become independent. Please understand the context. Plus, we had faith in the. So, keeping all these factors in mind, India called for a ceasefire. Because there's no question of taking back POK. That can be done only by fighting a war. Pakistan is not going to give it up. It will have nuclear implications. Right? This is not a child's play. It's not that you go and take back what is yours. It doesn't work like that in the real world. We have to be very realistic, pragmatic. India's trajectory is very different. Our focus is growth. Our focus is development. Our focus is to become a global power. Yes, Pakistan is a problem. Kashmir issue drags on. It affects India, no doubt. But that is something which we should manage, curb the terrorism that comes from Pakistan, and maybe we should go for a negotiated, mediated settlement sometime in the future. As of now, there is no solution. Given the current state of tensions, for the next maybe 15, 20 years, I don't see any solution for the Kashmir issue. The issue will remain as it is. Status quo will remain. So until then, we have to gear up our security to deal with Pakistan's misadventure, to counter the terrorism that Pakistan keeps sponsoring. In the future, if things change, you never know. We might work out a negotiated settlement for the Kashmir issue. Right? So that is the ideal approach. Going to war is not the option. We have never been the aggressor. Right? That is a clear image that we have established. And it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's going to drag the country down. You're going to drag the whole country down because of one issue. Yes, it's an emotional issue. Many people will feel happy if you go to war. But there's nothing to feel happy about in a conflict. Right? Everybody will suffer. There are no winners. There are no victors in a war. This is a very Alright? So it decided that covert proxy option is the best option. It's a low-cost option. It could destabilize India in the long run. And since the cost is low, Pakistan can prolong this covert war. It can wage the secret war for decades together, unlike a conventional war which can't be prolonged because of the higher cost. So Pakistan started looking out for opportunities where it can meddle in India's internal matters. The first opportunity for Pakistan opened up in Punjab, as the Khalistan movement had started by late 1970s. The Khalistan movement was a separatist movement led by Khalistan separatist and terrorist outfits. By the late 1970s, Khalistan movement was taking root in Punjab and also in other countries. Among the Sikh diaspora in Canada, in UK, in Europe, and in US as well. Khalistan separatist sentiments were spreading, and many Khalistan separatist groups were being formed. Their call was to separate Punjab, to break Punjab away from India, to make it a separate country called Khalistan. Now we will get into the details of this topic under internal security. In internal security, we have separate chapters for Khalistan terrorism. Next, we'll talk about Kashmir insurgency and terrorism. We'll talk about pan-India terrorism as well. I'm not going to go into the details here. I'll just point out what Pakistan has done, what is Pakistan's role in sponsoring these acts of terrorism. In internal security, we have dedicated chapters for these topics where we will study this in complete detail. For now, just understand that as Khalistan movement rose in Punjab and in other countries, Pakistan directly supported the Khalistan movement. It linked the Afghan conflict. It carried out a direct link, a direct connection between the Afghan war, which was happening parallelly in Afghanistan, and linked the Mujahideen outfits with the Khalistan outfits. Is that clear? Later, when we discuss Afghanistan, I'll explain the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. I'll explain how the Afghan crisis began. Right? We'll start from 1979. Why Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, pushing Afghanistan into a crisis. How this was exploited by US and American allies to counter the Soviet Union. How they worked with Pakistan to create Afghan Mujahideen. Right? Afghan Mujahideen was an American creation with the help of Pakistan. So the Afghan Mujahideen was fighting the Soviet forces, and Pakistan was involved in this covert war of the US. So Pakistan was getting a lot of funds and weapons from Western countries to support the Afghan Mujahideen to fight the Soviet forces who were occupying Afghanistan. Right? In 1979, Soviet Union had invaded and occupied Afghanistan. I'll explain this later why. When we come to Afghanistan, I'll explain why Soviet Union invaded the country. So as the Western countries were fighting the secret war against Soviet Union during the Cold War, they relied on Pakistan's ISI and the Pakistani army to support the creation of Afghan Mujahideen. They used religion, they misused religion. They radicalized the community, the local community here, the Pashtuns. Pashtuns are the natives of Afghanistan. They're found in parts of Pakistan as well, especially around Kandahar region. Right? In southern, western, and eastern Afghanistan, you find a local ethnic community called the Pashtuns. They're found in Pakistan as well. So the Pashtuns are used to defending their territory. Right? They're known to resist any outside occupation. And Pakistan capitalized on this. The ISI supported the Pashtun warlords, radicalized them, promoted jihadist ideology, and created the Afghan Mujahideen for the US. It was American creation enabled by Pakistan. The US and the Western countries, along with Saudi Arabia, they would pump millions of dollars into the hands of Pakistan. They would send all the weapons needed. And by using this, Pakistan created Afghan Mujahideen to resist the Soviet forces, to target the Soviet forces who were occupying Afghanistan. So essentially, Pakistan was getting the experience in covert proxy war. It had set up a terror sanctuary, a terror factory had been created along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border to raise the Afghan Mujahideen. Now the same infrastructure, the same funds and weapons were diverted to support the Khalistan terror groups as well. Because parallelly in Punjab, the Khalistan movement had started. And Pakistan would link the two. It would link the Afghan war with the Khalistan movement. It would shelter the Khalistan terrorists, give support to them, give them funds, training, and weapons by bringing them to the same terror camps where Afghan Mujahideen was being trained. The same strategy and tactics were employed by the ISI to train and support Khalistan terror groups to target India. This was the first major act of destabilization that Pakistan carried out in India. Is that clear? Pakistan would do the same in Kashmir few years later, starting from 1987. Until 1987, Kashmir was largely free from separatism and insurgency, from rigged and manipulated elections. And this rumor triggered a major separatist movement, where the local Kashmiri youth, they took up insurgency against the Indian state. They gave a call for separatism to liberate J&K from India, to break J&K from India, quite similar to the Khalistan movement. Pakistan immediately latched onto the opportunity and gave complete support to the separatist and insurgent groups and turned this into a violent terrorist movement and even gave a communal angle to the Kashmir conflict. Is that clear? Pakistan would link the J&K separatists and insurgents with the Afghan Mujahideen. The separatist leaders, they would be sheltered in POK. Pakistan would create a terror base. It created a safe haven in POK, supported the Kashmiri separatists, gave them training funds and weapons. It even introduced Afghan terrorists into Kashmir. Afghan and Pakistani Mujahideen were introduced, right? So jihad was extended by Pakistan into India, and this was again a misuse of religion. It was a misuse of religion for geopolitics, all right? And the terror groups were used by Pakistan to target the minorities, the Kashmiri Pandits, to introduce a communal divide, to make this a Hindu-Muslim conflict. To begin with, the Kashmir issue was never a Hindu-Muslim issue. It was just another separatist movement, right? Just like Khalistan, just like Northeast insurgency, right? We have seen many separatist movements in India. There's nothing new about that. India could have dealt with it. But Pakistan widened the divide, ensured that Kashmir conflict has a nationwide impact, and it used this issue to spread communal polarization across India. See, today, you go to any part of India to talk about the Kashmir issue, everybody has an opinion. Everyone has a very strong emotional connect to the Kashmir issue. That's because most of them see this as a Hindu-Muslim issue. This communal angle has been introduced by Pakistan. This is Pakistan's success in its covert war. This is how Pakistan has exploited the divide in our society, the communal divide in the Indian society. It used the terrorists to target Kashmiri Pandits, and as the Pandits had to evacuate, they had to flee from the region, they had to move out of Kashmir to save themselves, it led to a humanitarian disaster. For centuries, the Kashmiri Muslims and Kashmiri Pandits had lived in harmony. There was a lot of communal harmony between them. There is established evidence for that. Right? Kashmir was a very modern, progressive region. Historically, it's been very important for trade, for art, culture, etc. So in Kashmir, the Pandits, who are Hindu Brahmins essentially, and the Muslims, they have lived with great harmony for many centuries. This harmony was broken by some of these extremists who were working at the behest of Pakistan. Pakistan would use terrorism, religion-based terrorism. It would introduce foreign terrorists into the conflict. It would bring Afghan and Pakistani terrorists and use the terror groups to target the religious minorities, threaten them to leave the valley. And as the Pandits left, it triggered a humanitarian disaster and it had a huge communal impact across India. Right? It became a Hindu-Muslim issue thereafter. And then came the most destructive event, the demolition of Babri Masjid by radical Hindu extremists, which further widened the communal divide in India. So this communal divide that erupted in 1990s was exploited by Pakistan to support terrorism across the country. Because whenever there is communal polarization and communal violence, there will be victims who are left behind. It's easy to recruit, brainwash the youth, radicalize them and recruit them when the right motivation exists. So following these incidents, the targeting of Kashmiri Pandits, the demolition of Babri Masjid, because it led to massive Hindu-Muslim riots, right? And this created a base for Pakistan to promote recruitment and radicalization in different pockets of India and spread terrorism across Indian cities. This is when we saw the emergence of urban terrorism. Until then, terrorism was limited to our conflict zones. It was limited to Northeast India, Naxal corridor, Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir. But Pakistan expanded terrorism to our cities. It brought terror attacks to our doorsteps in Delhi, Mumbai, and various other cities. Because right now it had a ready base, it had set up many terror groups, including Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, Harkatul-Jihad-e-Islami. Right, the list goes on. These are the prominent ones. There are a few more terror groups that Pakistan created as far as Kashmir was concerned and pan-India terrorism was concerned. These were some of the Kashmir-centric groups, Lashkar, Jaish, Hizbul, and Huji, and few others. All right. Similarly, it supported many Khalistan-centric groups as well. It supported many Khalistan-based outfits, such as Babar Khalsa International, the Khalistan Zindabad Force, Khalistan Commando Force, International Sikh Youth Federation. All right. There were many such Khalistan separatist terrorist groups, just in India, but abroad as well, in Europe, in Canada, and in US. So you'll study more about this in internal security. Okay, don't worry much. This basic information is enough for international relations. In internal security, we'll study the same topics in complete detail. We'll talk about Khalistan movement, Kashmir terrorism and insurgency. We'll discuss pan-India terrorism as well in more detail under internal security. But here the point I'm trying to make is that you should understand that from 1970s, 1980s, Pakistan has been directly sponsoring covert wars against India. In Punjab, in Kashmir, and across India, it has enabled the rise of terrorism to destabilize India, to widen the divides in our society, especially the communal divide. This is the extent Pakistan has gone to destabilize India, and this is the strategy of bleeding India to 1,000 cuts. Right? This is what Pakistan swore in 1970s after the 1971 war. So since the last 50 years, it has been waging this covert proxy war to bleed India to 1,000 cuts. All right. Now moving on, the next big development was in 1996-97 when India brought out the Gujarat Doctrine into its foreign policy. The Gujarat Doctrine was brought out, which is one of the most important foreign policy doctrines that has been implemented in India's foreign policy, and it has a connection with Pakistan. So you should know what is the Gujarat Doctrine. It's very important for both prelims and mains, even though it's an old topic. Some provisions of Gujarat Doctrine which are still relevant. Even today, there are some Gujarat Doctrine principles which are still relevant in our foreign policy. So the Gujarat Doctrine was brought out by I.K. Gujral, who was the then External Affairs Minister of India and later became the Prime Minister of India as well. So he was the Foreign Minister of India for a short period and then the Prime Minister of India for a very short period. So I.K. Gujral brought out a set of principles to guide India's foreign policy, especially its neighborhood policy. The intention was to guide our relations with our neighboring countries, to guide our relations with our South Asian neighbors. And the focus of Gujral was to repair the relations, repair the damage that had been caused between India and its neighbors, and rebuild India's image. This was the primary objective of I.K. Gujral when he conceptualized the Gujarat Doctrine. Is that clear? Because by 1990s, India's image had been destroyed in South Asia. Our relations with almost every neighboring country had been compromised. You saw the state of relations between India and Pakistan. We understood the relations between India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh. Please remember, please go back to the discussion. With Nepal, our relations had been hit. Nepal always felt India was interfering. India was acting like a big brother. Bangladesh was hostile to India, sponsoring insurgency and criminal activities against India. Sri Lanka was a mess. We'll study India, Sri Lanka later. India was completely involved in Sri Lanka's ethnic conflict, and our strategy had backfired. Our relations with Sri Lanka had been destroyed completely. So this was a very volatile period for India in its foreign policy. We didn't have good relations with any of our neighbors except for Bhutan. Our ties with all the neighbors had been compromised, and India had gained a very bad reputation, a very bad image, that we were a big brother, a big country enforcing itself on other small countries. That was the kind of image which had been created. So to correct this, I.K. Gujral came out with this doctrine, which is heavily inspired by the Panchsheel principles. The Panchsheel is a set of principles which is the foundational principle between India-China relations. In the next chapter, when we talk about India-China, I'll explain what the Panchsheel principles are. So IK Gujral has drawn inspiration from the Panchsheel principles. Based on it, 5 principles were suggested which were implemented in Indian foreign policy. So you should know what are these principles, just the basics, and you should also whether they are relevant or not in today's context. The first principle is that with our friendly neighbors, such as Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, India will assist and help these countries unilaterally without expecting any reciprocity. Without expecting anything in return, we will help our neighbors in good faith and trust. We will invest in their countries, give funds to them, give any support needed for them, so that we can develop the region together along with correcting India's image. See, in a previous class, I had told you that diplomacy is all about reciprocity. In diplomacy, you always give something and you get back something in return. But for the first time, India was showing a bigger heart. As the biggest power of South Asia, right, as the lead power of South Asia, we had this responsibility. So India took up this role. We said, with our friendly neighbors, except for Pakistan, we will give without asking anything in return. We will become the leader of the region. We will display leadership. Instead of interfering and meddling in these countries, instead of picking issues with our neighbors, we will help and assist in whatever support they need. Let's say they want to take up an infrastructure project, India will be there for them. We will invest, we will provide the technical assistance. Let's say a neighbor goes through a disaster, we will be the first responder, we will help them out. Let's say a country faces an economic crisis, we'll help them out. This was the message India sent out under this principle, and we will not expect anything in return immediately. It's not a transactional relationship that we are looking for. We want to build bonds. We want to build a long-lasting bond based on good faith and trust. Winning trust, generating goodwill is hard effort, it's hard work. This is something money cannot buy. Right? You might have a lot of money, a lot of military power, but this will not buy you good faith and good trust. It will not create a goodwill for the country. This is something you earn over a period of time. That is what Gujarat stressed upon. This principle is relevant even today. We actually follow this as well even today. It's a very relevant principle. Even today, we are assisting our neighbors and many other countries, and we don't expect immediate reciprocity. Of course, whatever assistance we give will help India as well. We know that. Tomorrow, if you assist one country going through a crisis, it will come back and help us again. All right? That is why we have ensured that in the last 30 years, we unilaterally help other countries, especially when they are in distress. Now look at Turkey, for example. Turkey had become hostile to India. In the last few years, Turkey was supporting Pakistan. Turkey was questioning India on Kashmir. It was meddling in India's internal issues. And yet, when the earthquake hit, India was one of the first responders to reach out to Turkey. Why? Because we are reaching out in good faith. We are forgetting what has happened in the past, trying to build a new trust-based relationship by assisting the country during its time of distress. By doing that, tomorrow, maybe day after, maybe a few years later, it is going to come back. Turkey will change its perception of India going forward. Right? So that is a long-term impact we're looking for. We're not trying to force anyone. We're trying to assist and support. So this applied mainly for our neighboring countries, our friendly neighbors. This was the first and most important principle of Gujarat Doctrine. This is something that's relevant even today. All right. Next, the second principle: no South Asian country should allow its territory to be used against the interest of another country. It means no covert wars, no sponsoring radical terror groups against another country. You cannot use your territory to support terror outfits. You cannot create safe sanctuaries, no safe havens for terror groups. No country should interfere in the internal affairs of another. The third one, it's a related principle. And the fourth one, all South Asian countries must respect each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. So these principles, 2, 3, and 4, they're not seen to be very relevant. We haven't followed much of this. But when it was implemented, it did have a negative impact on India. India did try to follow some of the principles. It was enforced on the Indian agencies. It basically meant the covert operations of our intelligence agencies would be brought to an end. Under the Gujarat Doctrine, it has been reported that India's RAW was asked to shut down its covert operations in South Asia. RAW had built extensive covert capabilities in all the neighboring countries. Right? Yes, there have been instances where it has been misused, where India has excessively interfered in the internal matters of another country. There's a history of supporting extremist groups as well from the Indian side. But IK Gujral gave a call to end this. This was a time where India was supporting LTTE in Sri Lanka. Right? By 1980s, we had played a direct role in creating LTTE. We had waged a covert war in Pakistan to target the Pakistani support to Khalistan movement, to break that support from ISI to Khalistan terror groups. India's RAW had launched a counter operation under the Rajiv Gandhi government to punish Pakistan with tit-for-tat attacks. This was in the 1980s. Under the Rajiv Gandhi government, RAW had carried out tit-for-tat covert operations, punishing Pakistan with counter attacks for every attack carried out by Khalistan groups. Right? So this was a very volatile period where India was also getting involved in such extremist activities and covert activities. So IK Gujral gave a call to end this, and RAW's covert operations were shut down for a short period. According to many experts, this crippled our intelligence gathering efforts as well. As RAW was forced to shut the covert operations, it compromised the intelligence gathering operations as well, which was crucial, essential, because any country would be involved in intelligence gathering. This is a constant effort. Even if it's a friendly country, we always need intelligence. We will keep running operations to get intelligence from another country. Right? This is something every country does. So RAW's intelligence gathering capabilities were affected, according to many former officers, many former diplomats and intelligence officers. And many experts agree that Gujarat Doctrine had a negative impact on India's intelligence capabilities in South Asia. Many Indian assets, Indian sources were compromised. They were eliminated by the other countries, as India had to withdraw the support and India had to retreat from its covert operations. This is seen as a drawback, and also these principles are not too relevant. They are very idealistic, because in international relations, it's not possible entirely to stay away from interfering in another country. Right? You can't really promise that we'll not take a stand in the internal issues of another country. So principle 2, 3, 4 are not very relevant. We haven't followed much of this, but when it was implemented for a short period, it had a negative impact on our intelligence capabilities in South Asia, especially in Pakistan. It's been said that RAW lost a number of sources and assets as it shut down its covert operations. All right? So this reportedly affected our intelligence gathering abilities and had a huge impact on our security as well. So principles 2, 3, 4 are not relevant. We haven't followed much of it. When it was implemented, it had a negative impact. And the last principle, we commit to settle all disputes through peaceful bilateral negotiations. This is something India believes in even today. It's a very relevant principle. India has firmly believed that any dispute can be negotiated through talks, through negotiations. That's why I told you, we will never go to war with regard to POK. Negotiated settlement is something we always look for. Look at the Russia-Ukraine conflict. India has urged Russia-Ukraine to talk and negotiate and find a mediated settlement. That is something we strongly believe in. Right? We're not a war-going nation. And the fifth principle is something that's relevant. We follow this even today in our foreign policy. So if UPSC were to ask a question here, a means analysis question, asking what are the principles of Gujarat Doctrine, what is its relevance today, you have to bring out these points, these 5 principles, explain the context in which it was introduced, and point out which principles are relevant, which are not relevant. Principle number 1 and 5, where I put a tick mark, they are relevant. Principles 2, 3, and 4, which I'm crossing out, they are not relevant. All right? This is the analysis that you need to remember. You can even expect a basic prelims question. UPSC might list out the principles and ask you to identify which of them are part of the Gujarat Doctrine. So the implementation of Gujarat Doctrine reportedly improved our ties with our neighbors. Even with Pakistan, slightly there was an improvement. But this was very quickly disrupted in 1998 when the Vajpayee government took a gutsy decision to test India's nuclear weapons. India's nuclear weapons were being built since 1970s. We had already conducted one test in 1974 called Smiling Buddha, Operation Smiling Buddha. That was a very rudimentary nuclear device we had tested under the Indira Gandhi government. Since then, every subsequent government had backed and supported our nuclear program, right? From Indira Gandhi to Vajpayee administration, all the governments had backed the nuclear program. We had resisted the international pressure. We had countered the American pressure especially and gone against the international law, and we had developed our nuclear weapons. Finally, the time had come for India to test the weapons, and the Vajpayee government went ahead with it to carry out the Pokhran 2 nuclear tests. The second Pokhran test was carried out in 1998, which established India as a nuclear power. We displayed our nuclear power to the rest of the world by conducting these tests. This triggered a nuclear arms race and increased tensions because Pakistan also retaliated through its own nuclear tests. Since 1980s, even Pakistan had been pursuing nuclear weapons. It had got a lot of support from China. China had secretly provided support to Pakistan to develop nuclear weapons. It had shared nuclear material, nuclear technology and designs, and assisted Pakistan in building its nuclear arsenal. So as soon as India tested its nuclear bombs, within 2 weeks, in just 2 weeks, Pakistan also conducted a counter test, thus triggering a nuclear arms race in the region. So for the first time in human history, we had 2 nuclear armed rivals who have a history of war and conflict, who have an active border dispute, possessing nuclear weapons, and both are right next to each other. Both are neighbors of each other. This has never happened in human history. Even during Cold War, right? US and Russia, they never fought a direct war. Till date, US and Russia have never fought a direct conflict, right? They don't share borders with each other like India and Pakistan. So India and Pakistan are the only 2 countries which have fought multiple wars, and we have an ongoing dispute and a conflict, plus active sponsorship of terrorism, and we have high tensions, and we possess nuclear weapons. Now, this is a dangerous mix. It's a dangerous cocktail. This could explode any time, right? A possible war between the 2 countries could quickly escalate. It could go out of control and reach the nuclear threshold. And since India-Pakistan tested the weapons in 98, this has been the biggest concern of every country. One of the biggest concerns of the global community is the possible escalation of tensions between India and Pakistan, which might lead to nuclear consequences. Is that clear? So when both India and Pakistan tested their weapons, they both were punished with economic and technological sanctions led by US, China, and many other countries. Since we had violated non-proliferation treaty, we had broken international rules and law, India and Pakistan both were punished and they were targeted with economic and technological sanctions. Now, this was a period of high tensions. This was a period where a lot of adverse developments were happening, and honestly, it was a very challenging period for Prime Minister Vajpayee. Under this environment, the US pushed India and Pakistan to hold a negotiation. As tensions were rising, it was a priority for the US to stabilize the relationship, and the US brought a lot of pressure on Pakistan and India. This led Prime Minister Vajpayee to pay a historic visit to Pakistan to meet his counterpart, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Both the leaders actually had a decent equation between them. Vajpayee paid this historic visit to attend the Lahore summit between India and Pakistan, which is actually a historic summit. During the summit, tensions were cooled down, tensions were brought down, and a number of new initiatives were announced to repair the relationship and to reduce the tensions. There was focus on improving our cultural and economic relations during the Lahore summit. Is that clear? Both the sides agreed that they will exchange a list of their nuclear sites every year. We signed an agreement that we are going to exchange the sites of our nuclear facilities, and we'll promise we'll not target them, will not target each other's nuclear facilities. Even if we were to go to war tomorrow, India and Pakistan have a legal obligation to not target the nuclear facilities of each other. So every year, India and Pakistan meet each other on the 1st of January, and we exchange the list of our nuclear facilities. So Pakistan will know where our nuclear facilities are located. If there is ever a war in the future, Pakistan is obligated to not hit any of the nuclear plants, right, or any of the nuclear facilities where nuclear material is stored. Similarly, India has a commitment. Even if there is a war tomorrow, we have an obligation to not target Pakistan's nuclear facilities. This provides for more stability, more transparency in the relationship, and along with this, many important cultural economic initiatives were also launched. A new bus service was launched, right? The Samjhauta Express was restarted, connecting Delhi with Islamabad, then Amritsar with Lahore. So such important connectivity projects were opened, border trade was promoted, and cultural ties were promoted. So this was actually a positive development, and India and Pakistan were coming closer to each other for the first time in many, many years. This was happening under American pressure as well. But right when things were improving, we witnessed a military coup. The then army chief, Pervez Musharraf, who passed away recently, just a few days back, former Pakistani dictator, president and army chief, Pervez Musharraf, he passed away. So back then, he was the army chief. The Pakistani army was unhappy with the positive development. All right. Now, this is a pattern we have noticed. Whenever the 2 governments get close to each other, even if there is a slight improvement in relations between the Indian government and the Pakistani government, it is not liked by the deep state. The army and the ISI will try to break it at any cost because the deep state will remain powerful only when India is a threat. So it cannot afford friendly relations between the Indian government and the Pakistani government. Even if there is a slight improvement, the deep state will ensure it will do something. It will launch a major attack on India to ensure that those relations are broken because Pakistan wants to ensure that India remains a hostile threat. That is the excuse the army gives to the people to justify its dominance. See, why do you think Pakistan has not witnessed a revolution? Any other country by this point would have seen a major rebellion where people would have rebelled. Pakistani people are suffering. They don't have jobs, they don't have food, no electricity, no water. This is the case for many years. And yet, questions are not raised against the army and the ISI. Rather, there is a lot of support to the army and ISI. It's because Pakistan's deep state has engineered this support. It has made itself prominent by projecting India as a constant threat. This is Pakistan's war against its own people. The deep state has cornered all the resources, the army, the ISI, right? All these officials are very rich. They get all the resources. There's a lot of corruption as well. They retain all the key decision-making powers, and yet they're not questioned. There's no major rebellion that the country has seen, despite all the problems and the crisis it has suffered from. It's because the people are made to believe on a large scale that India is an immediate threat. If the army is not strong, if ISI is not strong, then Pakistan would be erased, wiped out by India. That is the wrong message that Pakistan keeps propagating. This is the propaganda of the deep state. So the dominance and the survival of the army and ISI is dependent on constant tensions prevailing between India and Pakistan. As long as there are tensions, as long as India is hostile to Pakistan, it actually helps the army and the ISI. Because they can easily show to their people that India is a threat, a hostile threat. By using that as an excuse, the deep state will control all the key decisions, control the wealth, enjoy all the benefits, while the common man in Pakistan suffers without asking questions. Because they're all worried that India is going to attack them. That is the image, the perception Pakistan has created. This is a deliberate propaganda. Is that clear? So Pakistan, the deep state, it would never allow good relations to flourish. We have seen a pattern in the last 30 years. Whenever there is an improvement in the relationship, something major will happen to break that relationship. We saw this under Vajpayee. We have seen this under Manmohan Singh. We have seen this under Modi as well. When Prime Minister Vajpayee got closer to Nawaz Sharif and made some progress, immediately the deep state retaliated and the army threw the government out. It threw out Nawaz Sharif's government, and Pervez Musharraf, the then army chief, captured power and appointed himself as a military dictator and became the president of Pakistan. When Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was negotiating with Pakistan from 2005 to 2008, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh also had opened a similar negotiation. There was a back channel talk that was going on to repair and normalize the relationship. Through a secret back channel, Manmohan Singh's envoy, Satinder Lamba, a former IFS officer, he was negotiating with the Pakistani envoy appointed by then President Pervez Musharraf. These envoys of India-Pakistan were secretly negotiating a deal to stabilize the relationship, and India was actually making progress. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and then President Pervez Musharraf, they made some progress between 2005 and 2008. They built confidence in the relationship. They implemented few confidence-building measures. These confidence-building measures improves trust. It helps the other side to trust the other country. So many positive steps were being taken through these talks that were happening to the back channel. Back channel diplomacy is very common, especially between two hostile countries. Because sometimes you won't be able to discuss all issues in the public domain. Right? When you have a hostile relationship, there won't be enough media support, public support, and opposition support to talk to the hostile country. If the government tries to talk, it will attract a lot of attention from the media, the public, and the opposition, and puts a lot of pressure on the relationship. Right? Look at US and Soviet Union, US and Russia. Even though they have intense rivalry, they do have a secret back channel where sometimes they do talk to each other, especially when big issues come up. Similarly, India Pakistan have a history of back channel diplomacy. So this attempt was made right when India Pakistan were getting closer. We saw the biggest attack against India, the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. One of the reasons behind Mumbai attacks was to break the back channel talks between the Indian government and the Pakistani government. Because after this, if India were to go ahead and sign some agreements or deals, right, the public, the opposition, the media would criticize the government, blame the government. How could we talk to Pakistan, which is sponsoring terror attacks against India? Right? That is the pressure that will come up. That is why quite often back channel diplomacy is preferred in case of hostile countries. Right? At the level of the top leadership, they will have a secret back channel talk through which substantial progress can be made. They can reach a settlement and then bring out the details in the public domain. According to several reports, Manmohan Singh and Pervez Musharraf had come very close to resolving one of the minor disputes, and most likely it was about the Sir Creek dispute. Imagine the benefit of this. If we had resolved Sir Creek dispute, that would have been one success. We could have built upon it further, and slowly we could have normalized the relations. But this was broken, disrupted because of the Mumbai attacks that was carefully planned and executed by the ISI and the army. We have seen the same happen under Modi government as well. The same pattern repeats. Prime Minister Modi reached out to Pakistan in a very friendly manner in 2014. He was following the steps of his predecessors. That was Vajpayee, Narasimha Rao, Manmohan Singh. All Indian prime ministers had reached out to Pakistan with a friendly gesture. So Prime Minister Modi also reached out, and during his swearing-in ceremony, he invited all the SAARC leaders. Prime Minister Modi had invited all the SAARC leaders to attend his swearing-in ceremony, where India would launch the neighborhood first policy. Then Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, he was back in power. Nawaz Sharif was invited by Prime Minister Modi when he was elected for the first term, and Nawaz Sharif participated as well, along with all the SAARC leaders. Now this was a historic moment, a landmark moment. For the first time, all South Asian leaders were coming together for a swearing-in ceremony. India used the occasion to launch the neighborhood first policy, under which we said we will give priority to our neighboring countries in South Asia. We said we will prioritize our ties with our neighbors, resolve all the issues. So all the leaders of SAARC took part in the swearing-in ceremony, right? The President of Sri Lanka, Prime Minister of Bangladesh, leaders from Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, and Afghanistan. All these leaders were invited, along with the Pakistani Prime Minister. This set off a new relationship between Nawaz Sharif and Modi. They both got close to each other. India did prioritize Pakistan as well under neighborhood first policy, and actually friendly relations started building again. During the SCO BRICS summit at UFA, India and Pakistan even met each other and issued a joint statement indicating their willingness to talk about terrorism and as well as the Kashmir issue. Pakistan formally accepted to the statement that it's ready to talk about terrorism. In return, India accepted to talk about every issue, including the Kashmir issue. So these were very positive developments that were happening, and Prime Minister Modi even paid a surprise visit to Pakistan. PM Modi was coming back from a foreign event, and he suddenly landed in Pakistan unannounced. Because in Nawaz Sharif's family, there was a wedding that was taking place, and Prime Minister Modi attended as a surprise guest, which highlighted the close relations that were forming between the two leaders. It was a reflection of the relations that were developing between India and Pakistan, between the government of India and the civilian government of Pakistan. These were positive developments. And as expected, the history repeats, the pattern repeats. Whenever there is an improvement in the relationship, it is broken by the deep state. The Pakistani deep state broke this by launching a new wave of attacks against India. A series of new kind of attacks happened against India that broke the relationship. And today, India and Pakistan are very hostile again. Tensions are very high since the last 6 to 7 years. And it's at one of the lowest points as of today. Today, our ties are broken completely. It's all because the deep state retaliated to break the close relations that were building between the two governments. So this is the repeat behavior of Pakistan. This is the pattern that you need to understand. Clear? Now, coming back to the 1990s. After Pervez Musharraf took control, the terror attacks against India kept increasing. And prior to this, prior to the military coup, even before the Lahore summit, Pakistan had made its attempt to capture Kargil And this was seen as a pet project of Parvez Musharraf when he was the army chief. When Parvez Musharraf was still the army chief, he reportedly planned and approved one of the most controversial, notorious operations to capture Kargil heights from India. Kargil belongs to India. But Parvez Musharraf, the then army chief, this was before Lahore summit, before the military coup. Nawaz Sharif was still the prime minister. Parvez Musharraf had used the army to capture Kargil heights. This was done without the knowledge of Nawaz Sharif's government. That is how the army bypasses the civilian government, dominates over the civilian government. This led India to declare a limited conflict. It led to a limited war between India and Pakistan in the Kargil sector, and India had to fight back to recapture Kargil. This was seen as an intelligence and security failure, as India had failed to detect the breaches, the incursions by Pakistani troops. By the time India noticed, it was already too late. The Pakistani army had captured many key positions in Kargil, and then Vajpayee government declared war, a limited war, to retake Kargil. The Indian Army and Indian Air Force both played a critical role in pushing back the Pakistani intruders. Targeted bombings were carried out using fighter jets, and ground operations were also carried out to remove the infiltrators, to throw out the Pakistani occupiers, and India recaptured Kargil completely. India won the conflict very clearly, and please note, this is the only conflict in the world, right? The only war the world has ever seen, which has been fought between two nuclear-armed countries. There has never been one such incident, not even between US and Soviet Union, even during the peak of the Cold War. US and Soviet Union have fought covert wars, indirect wars with each other, but directly they have never fought a conflict because they know both possess nuclear weapons. India, Pakistan, after they tested nuclear weapons in '98, they fought the Kargil war under the nuclear umbrella, under the nuclear threshold. So there was always a fear that if things escalate, if things go wrong, if there is a miscalculation or an accident, it could easily result in a nuclear disaster between the two countries. That would affect not just India and Pakistan, it would destroy South Asia and the whole world as well. Right? It's because of this fear, this concern, the US started putting pressure on India and Pakistan. That is why the US wanted the two countries to negotiate after the Kargil war. This is what led to the Lahore summit, when Vajpayee met with Nawaz Sharif and took up some important initiatives, but it was countered by the army, and Parvez Musharraf threw the government out and captured power through a military coup. Pakistan is not new to military coups. There have been many military coups in the past. Many army chiefs have thrown the leaders out, the prime ministers out, and they've captured power in the country. Alright? So as Parvez Musharraf took over the country and Pakistan became a military dictatorship, the terrorism against India also increased, including major acts of terrorism, such as the hijacking of IC-814. Right? An Indian aircraft coming from Nepal was hijacked by Pakistani terrorists. The hijacked aircraft was taken out of India. The Vajpayee government failed to handle the crisis effectively. Right? The government was under tremendous pressure. Before we could disable or demobilize the aircraft, the hijacked aircraft was taken out of Indian airspace, and India lost all the leverage. The aircraft was taken by the hijackers to Lahore for a short period. Pakistan only refueled the aircraft and sent it back because Pakistan didn't want any blame for the attack. Then the hijackers took the aircraft to Dubai in UAE, and then they took it to Kandahar in Afghanistan. In 1999, Afghanistan was under Taliban. The Taliban was in power. It captured power in the country. The Taliban protected the hijacked aircraft and the hijackers because obviously they were all related. They were all close to each other. Pakistan has enabled this close linkages between Taliban, the Afghan Taliban, and the various terrorist outfits. So there was no question of any commando raid or military operation to release the hostages. The only option we had was to talk, negotiate with the hijackers. They demanded the release of few dreaded terrorists. Finally, India accepted 3 demands. We agreed to release 3 dreaded terrorists. And one of them was Masood Azhar. Masood Azhar was in Indian jail, in Indian custody. India was forced to release him during IC-814 hijacking. Is that clear? And later he went on to establish the Jaish-e-Mohammed. That is the price we had to pay. The other 2 terrorists as well went on to commit major acts of terrorism. Alright? Masood Azhar founded Jaish-e-Mohammed after being released by India. India's foreign minister Jaswant Singh had to accompany the terrorists from Indian jails, transport them to Kandahar and hand them over to the hijackers. And in return, hostages were released. So India managed to save the lives of the hostages, except for one who was stabbed. There was only one person who was killed. But we paid a very big price, a very long-lasting price, because we released 3 top terrorists. They all went on to commit major acts of terrorism after India released them. Masood Azhar founded Jaish-e-Mohammed. The other terrorist, Omar Sheikh, was involved in many major acts of terrorism, including the assassination of Daniel Pearl, the American journalist who was beheaded in Pakistan. He was beheaded live on camera. This attack was carried out by Omar Sheikh. He was involved in financing 9/11 attacks. Alright, he's a notorious figure. Omar Sheikh remains in a Pakistani jail. He still has ties with terror groups. He still keeps backing terror acts against India from jail itself. Right, he's a very interesting character. He's actually highly educated. He's a graduate from the London School of Economics. Right, he took up radicalism, terrorism, right, and joined these terror groups to fight against India and Kashmir. He had been arrested by India, but he released them during the hijacking, and he went on to commit many big acts of terrorism. In fact, the movie Omerta by Rajkumar Rao is based on the life of Omar Sheikh. It's a biography of Omar Sheikh. Right? The other terrorist, Mushtaq Zardar, is also another notorious terrorist we released. He remains active even today. He continues to plan and carry out attacks against India. So India paid a very big price for mishandling the IC-814 hijacking. Especially the release of Masood Azhar was the biggest setback for India because he founded Jaish-e-Mohammed, which today is the biggest threat for India. It has carried out many major terror attacks, including the parliament attacks of 2001. All the recent attacks, the Uri attacks, Pulwama attacks, all these recent attacks also have been carried out by Jaish-e-Mohammed. So that is the extent of terrorism that Pakistan has sponsored against India. So as tensions were high in 2001, the US again pushed India to talk and negotiate. Because for the Americans, it was a priority to stabilize the relations between India and Pakistan. See, this was not a genuine interest of the US. They didn't care about India or Pakistan. They had their own interests. One, they didn't want any nuclear escalation between India and Pakistan because that would have a global impact. Second, by this time, the 9/11 attacks had happened. Al-Qaeda had carried out the world's biggest attack. Right? It had hijacked aircrafts, commercial aircrafts, and flown them into buildings, into important strategic buildings. The World Trade Center, the Pentagon, right? Hundreds and hundreds of people were killed, around 3,000 people were killed, which makes it one of the biggest terror attacks and the most sophisticated attacks the world has ever seen. So this pushed US to declare a global war on terrorism. And the US invaded Afghanistan to topple the Taliban government, which was sheltering the Al-Qaeda. The Taliban was targeted by the US. The US invaded the country as part of its global war on terrorism. And as it was hunting Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, who were responsible for the attacks, the US targeted Taliban as well as it was sheltering Al-Qaeda. Taliban refused to cooperate. Taliban refused to give up Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda, and hence US declared war on Afghanistan itself. It got the approval of the UN and created a coalition force to invade Afghanistan and topple the Taliban government. So at this point, the priority for the Americans was to fight the war in Afghanistan. And they knew they cannot do this without the help of Pakistan. because Pakistan had all the contacts with Taliban and Al-Qaeda and with all the terrorist groups. So the US wanted Pakistan to focus on Afghanistan, not on India. Is that clear? The Americans, for them, the priority was Afghanistan. So wanted Pakistan to keep all its attention on Afghanistan, to focus entirely on the Afghan war, to assist US in targeting Taliban and Al-Qaeda. So the Pakistani troops were stationed on the western borders of Pakistan along the Afghan border. This was because of American pressure. Pakistan was desperate to pull the troops away. Pakistan didn't really want to fight Taliban and Al-Qaeda because they were like brother organizations. There is so much radicalization within the ISI and the Pakistani army that they will not target these terror groups. They see them as brother organizations. So Pakistan needed an excuse to pull the troops away, to divert the troops away from the Afghan border, and the best excuse was tensions with India. Right? And how do you trigger tensions with India? Very simple. Use a terror group to carry out a major attack. And that is why the Jaish-e-Mohammed was used to execute the biggest attack, one of the biggest attacks, the parliament attack. The very temple of Indian democracy was attacked. Right? Fortunately, thanks to the bravery of you Indian security personnel, the attack was defeated. If it had gone through, if you MPs or ministers or maybe the Prime Minister, if they were targeted, who were all in the Parliament House at that point, it would have been the biggest tragedy for India. Right? So this pushed India to retaliate. India carried out a massive troop mobilization under Operation Parakram that was approved by Prime Minister Vajpayee. This was an attack on the very temple of Indian democracy, so India decided to retaliate. India launched Operation Parakram, which was a quick mobilization of Indian troops to launch a surprise attack against Pakistan, to punish Pakistan, to intrude into Pakistani territory quickly within 24 to 48 hours and force Pakistan to negotiate and talk and give up terrorism. This was a strategy, a military strategy that was put into action by Vajpayee government. But unfortunately, Operation Parakram turned out as a failure for India. The initial idea was to mobilize within 24 to 48 hours, quickly mobilize the troops, launch a surprise war against Pakistan, and hold some Pakistani territory as a leverage to force Pakistan to talk and negotiate, so we can push Pakistan to give up terrorism. But unfortunately, the strategy did not work because the Indian army did not have the preparedness, the logistics, the equipment. It was just a theory on paper. It was a strategy on paper. It couldn't be implemented in the real world. We took almost 5 to 6 months to mobilize the troops. This was a huge gap. Pakistan also did a counter mobilization. The surprise element was lost, and it led to a big military standoff for several months between India and Pakistan. Is that clear? So India incurred a huge cost in this mobilization without achieving anything concrete. Because we took 6 months to mobilize the troops where we had lost the surprise element. There was no question of launching an attack, but Pakistan also countered the mobilization through a counter deployment. So it led to a tense military standoff lasting several months, and India learned an important lesson regarding troop modernization. So from the failure of Operation Parakram, Indian army has drawn lessons. And reportedly, it has come out with a better approach, with a fine-tuned approach, which is called the cold start doctrine of India. The cold start doctrine of the Indian army. According to reports, this is a doctrine, a strategy developed by the Indian army based on the experience of Operation Parakram. Today, under cold start doctrine, Indian army has reportedly built the capability, the logistics, to mobilize our troops within 24 to 48 hours after receiving the orders. This is specifically designed as a response to terrorism. If there is another major attack on India, this will be one of the military options presented to the government. All right? It is a refined version of Operation Parakram, under which Indian army will quickly mobilize within 24 to 48 hours. Today, it has better training, the right equipment, the right logistics. It is possible to mobilize the troops within 24 to 48 hours and launch a surprise attack against Pakistan. The idea is to hold some Pakistani territory and use that as a leverage to push Pakistan to negotiate. Is that clear? This is informally called the cold start doctrine. It's not the official name. Officially, it does not exist. The government of India, the army, defense ministry, they deny that we have anything called cold start doctrine. Obviously, they will not acknowledge that. But it's widely reported in media. It's discussed within the strategic community as well, in the think tanks as well, that Indian army does have a military option called cold start doctrine. All right? It's not a formal official name. It's an informal name coined by the media itself, coined by strategic experts. All right? So under this pressure, as tensions were increasing, the US pushed India-Pakistan to negotiate, leading to the Agra summit, which ended as a failure between Prime Minister Vajpayee and Pervez Musharraf. Because for the Americans, it was a priority for Pakistan to concentrate in Afghanistan, not on India. Pakistan had diverted itself deliberately by carrying out the parliament attacks. Deliberately, tensions had been increased. So that is why US pushed both the sides to negotiate again, and it led to the Agra summit. President Musharraf visited India, met Vajpayee at Agra, but the summit was a failure because of our differences. Both sides had become very rigid because of all the bitter experiences that had happened in the last 3-4 years. India said, we will not talk about any other issue if you don't talk about terrorism. India said, terrorism and talks cannot go hand in hand. Terror and talks cannot go simultaneously, because when you're sponsoring terrorism constantly, how can we talk to you? This was India's position. But Pakistan said, we cannot talk about terrorism unless and until India talks about Kashmir dispute. That was Pakistan's condition. Pakistan said, if you want to discuss terrorism, first talk about Kashmir. Settle the Kashmir issue, then we'll talk about terrorism. This difference, this rigidity on both the sides led to the failure of the Agra summit, and nothing concrete was achieved at the Agra summit. All right? So after this, the tensions prevailed for a few more years. Parallelly, there was insurgency, terrorism going on in J&K, right? So these tensions remained at least until 2003, when both sides agreed to uphold the ceasefire. In 2003, there was considerable pressure from the US to reduce the tensions so that Pakistan can fully concentrate in Afghanistan and help the American troops. So in 2003, Pakistan agreed to respect the ceasefire. India also made the same commitment. And since then, the scale of tensions, violence, and terrorism in J&K started slightly declining and coming down. Recently, just a couple of years back in 2021, India-Pakistan issued a joint statement committing to uphold the ceasefire, the 2003 ceasefire. All right? So comparatively, the tensions and violence has actually reduced in the last 20 years compared to what it was in 1980s, 1990s. The most difficult period in our relationship, if you ask me, was from 1980s to 2003. This honestly was the most difficult period in India-Pakistan relations. Things have slightly become better in the last. Yes, terrorism continues, but the format of terrorism, the nature of terrorism has changed. Until the Mumbai attacks of 2008, which was carried out by Lashkar-e-Toiba, which was the biggest terror attack on India, right? This was our 9/11 moment. Since the Mumbai attacks, Pakistan has shifted its strategy. It has been forced to adopt a new strategy, a new format of attacks against India. Initially, it was mainly focusing on civilian targets. But after Mumbai attacks, India brought a lot of international pressure from US, France, Russia, UN, and other countries. We have used bodies like FATF as well to target and punish Pakistan. Because of this international pressure, Pakistan has been pushed to not use terror attacks against Indian cities, against Indian civilians. Because India has threatened the international community that if there is another major attack on Indian soil, on an Indian city which attacks Indian civilians, then the government will not hold back. India will retaliate, even with the possibility of going to war with Pakistan. So that is why there's been a lot of pressure on Pakistan from Western countries. Because see, parallelly, our relations also improved with US and Western countries. In the Mumbai attacks, Western nationals were targeted. Americans and Europeans were specifically targeted by the Lashkar-e-Toiba. Finally, the Western countries heard what India was shouting from almost 20 years. From 1980s, we were shouting to the Americans, showing them evidence that Pakistan cannot be trusted. The terror group sponsored by Pakistan could be a threat to their countries as well. We were telling this from 1980s, but still they didn't hear, they didn't listen to it. All right. But when the Mumbai attacks happened, when American European citizens were singled out by the Lashkar terrorists, then Western countries realized the significance of the threat. They started collaborating with India more closely because from 2001 itself, between India, US, and between India and European countries, very close security and intelligence relations had developed. In the security and intelligence domain, India was already sharing information with US and the European countries after the 9/11 attacks. India was becoming a key security partner. We were focusing on counterterrorism and promoting intelligence sharing between the countries. Is that clear? So we were getting closer to these countries in the security and defense domain. And when American and European nationals were targeted, this further became a ground for India and these countries to work together. So after the Mumbai attacks, India has exerted coercive diplomatic pressure. India is engaged in coercive diplomacy under the Manmohan Singh government and also under the Modi government. We have exerted a lot of diplomatic pressure on Pakistan to stay away from attacking Indian cities and civilians. If there is going to be another major attack on a city or civilians, India will not hold back. We might even risk going to war with Pakistan. All right, this is one reason why you don't witness a major terror attack in India after the Mumbai attacks. After 2008, you don't see a major attack in an Indian city or an Indian civilian population. There have been minor incidents. There was one attack in Pune, few small attacks here and there, but we haven't seen a major terrorist attack on an Indian city targeting India's civilian population. That's why the last 15 years has been relatively peaceful. It's been free from terror attacks in our cities. The reason is India has put a lot of pressure on Pakistan through the global community, through the United Nations, through Financial Action Task Force, and through the Western governments. We have put a lot of pressure on Pakistan. So that is why Pakistan has adopted a change in its strategy. It has adopted a new format of attacks against India. The nature of terrorism has changed in the last 8 years. And the new strategy is to attack the military installations. Since Pakistan cannot easily attack cities and India's civilian population, it is now focusing more on our military sites. That is why a number of attacks have taken place against India's military bases. It started in 2014. It was designed to break the friendly relations between Modi and Nawaz Sharif, which was building under the neighborhood first policy. But the Pakistani deep state broke this by carrying out Gurdaspur and Pathankot attacks. Gurdaspur is a major forward area in the Punjab sector. Pathankot is a major air base of the Indian Air Force. Right? These attacks were carried out by Jaish-e-Mohammed. Then we saw the Uri attacks in 2016, again carried out by Jaish-e-Mohammed. Many Indian soldiers were killed, which triggered a huge outrage, and the government responded this time. India engaged in a diplomatic offensive by following the SARC minus Pakistan strategy. Remember, I've explained this in detail. I need not repeat these points. When we spoke about SARC and BIMSTEC, I've repeatedly explained the SARC minus Pakistan approach. We started isolating and sidelining Pakistan as a diplomatic offensive. We started using UN and FATF to cripple Pakistan's economy. And more importantly, India exercised the hard military option as well. India leveraged its hard power to conduct a surgical strike by using the para-special forces to eliminate some of the terror launch pads in POK, in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Across the LOC, Indian special forces were infiltrated for a special strike for a covert mission, and several terror launch pads were destroyed, along with killing several terrorists as a retaliation. All right. Parallelly, major unrest was triggered by the ISI in Kashmir. This was again deliberate because India was succeeding in counter-terror operations. Indian Army, IB, RAW, the JNK police, they all had done a credible job in Kashmir in keeping terrorism under check. Many young terrorists were killed in encounters based on intelligence-based operations. This was exploited by Pakistan's ISI. It would use the local civilians and sympathizers to push for major protests against the Indian troops and even encourage stone pelting and riots and mobs against the Indian troops. This became a new nightmare in JNK. It was a new Pakistani strategy. Along with targeting our military sites, it was now trying to create unrest in Kashmir. Now, let's say Indian Army is carrying out a live counter-terror operation. Let's say they have received intelligence about a terrorist group which is hiding in a certain house. Immediately, Indian Army, Rashtriya Rifles, which is deployed here to the Northern Command, right? It's the lead force for counter-terror and counter-insurgency operations. So along with the Indian Army, the JNK police and CRPF will also get involved. So when this live operation begins, we often notice that locals will assemble. They'll try to prevent the operation. They'll try to disrupt the operation, and they'll start pelting stones against Indian soldiers. Now, this is a very risky environment. It is risking the lives of our soldiers, where terrorists are hiding, where a live encounter is going on, right? And if Indian forces retaliate against the mobs, it could injure and kill many civilians as well. That is what Pakistan wants. Pakistan has deliberately done this to instigate the Indian troops, to push them to overreact. And the moment they overreact to control the mobs, it will lead to injuries and deaths, which will be exploited and internationalized by Pakistan. When stone pelting increased in Kashmir, Indian forces like CRPF, they started using non-lethal weapons like pellet guns to control the mobs. Pellet guns are very, very controversial. It may not kill you, but it can cause a lot of defacement. If it is fired from a close range, right, it fires these small pellets, very small metal pieces that punctures your body. It leaves behind a lot of scars on your face, your body when it takes the hit, and the images are very horrifying in nature, right? So these pellet guns have hit. They have hit women, children, old people as well. And Pakistan captures these images, these videos, and takes it to the global platforms. It will bring it to the UN, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, to target India, to accuse that India is violating human rights. Sometimes these mob control methods could result in death as well. Let's say, for example, fire might be opened to disperse a mob, right? Or in self-defense, fire might be opened. Or few other harsh methods could be used, resulting in the death of a protester. If civilians die, right, Pakistan will exploit that issue. It will bring the matter at the global level to target India and internationalize the Kashmir issue. This is Pakistan's attempt to bring international involvement into the Kashmir dispute. It has brought it up at OIC on several occasions at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It's brought it up at the UN as well, and this is a clear attempt to target India, to embarrass India, to put India on the back foot. So that is the new challenge we are facing. So as a result, tensions were very high since 2016. Since Uri attacks, relations have been completely broken. Uri attack was the breaking point. Then came the devastating Pulwama attacks of 2019, where again the Jaish-e-Mohammed carried out a suicide bombing and killed 40 CRPF Jawans. A CRPF convoy was targeted at Pulwama. 40 CRPF Jawans lost their lives, and again India was forced to retaliate and punish Pakistan. This time the Indian Air Force was used as a military option to carry out a deep penetration airstrike at Balkot, which is in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Balkot is actually quite far away from India. So Indian fighter jets, around 12 Mirage fighter jets of the Indian Air Force, they penetrated Pakistani airspace for the first time since 1971. The last time Indian jets had entered Pakistani airspace was in 1971. During Kargil war, Indian Air Force was not used to enter Pakistani airspace. Vajpayee government had made clear instructions to the Indian Air Force that Indian fighter jets will be used only within Indian airspace. They should remain within Indian airspace to target the Kargil positions, the Kargil heights that Pakistan had occupied. Clear orders were given not to cross into Pakistani airspace because that could escalate the war. We didn't want to escalate the Kargil conflict. So since 1971, Indian jets had never entered Pakistani airspace. This was the first time Indian Air Force was breaching Pakistani airspace. It was a covert mission, and it was successfully executed by the Indian Air Force. They penetrated deep into Pakistani territory, launched precision bombs to target the terror camps at Balkot, where Jaish-e-Mohammed had several terror training camps. According to India, several terrorists were killed along precision bombs to target the terror camps at Balkot, where Jaish-e-Mohammed had challenge we are facing. So as a result, tensions were very high since 2016. Since Uri attacks, relations have been completely broken. Uri attack was the breaking point. Then came the devastating Pulwama attacks of 2019, where again the Jaish-e-Mohammed carried out a suicide bombing and killed 40 CRPF Jawans. A CRPF convoy was targeted at Pulwama. 40 CRPF Jawans lost their lives, and again India was forced to retaliate and punish Pakistan. This time the Indian Air Force was used as a military option to carry out a deep penetration airstrike at Balkot, which is in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Balkot is actually quite far away from India. So Indian fighter jets, around 12 Mirage fighter jets of the Indian Air Force, they penetrated Pakistani airspace for the first time since 1971. The last time Indian jets had entered Pakistani airspace was in 1971. During Kargil war, Indian Air Force was not used to enter Pakistani airspace. Vajpayee government had made clear instructions to the Indian Air Force that Indian fighter jets will be used only within Indian airspace. They should remain within Indian airspace to target the Kargil positions, the Kargil heights that Pakistan had occupied. Clear orders were given not to cross into Pakistani airspace because that could escalate the war. We didn't want to escalate the Kargil conflict. So since 1971, Indian jets had never entered Pakistani airspace. This was the first time Indian Air Force was breaching Pakistani airspace. It was a covert mission, and it was successfully executed by the Indian Air Force. They penetrated deep into Pakistani territory, launched precision bombs to target the terror camps at Balkot, where Jaish-e-Mohammed had several terror training camps. According to India, several terrorists were killed, along with many camps being destroyed. This increased the tensions because this was an act of war by India. India had breached Pakistani sovereignty, bombed Pakistani territory, killed people on Pakistani soil. This was obviously an act of war, and Pakistan retaliated. It responded the next day. Pakistan also mobilized its air force and carried out an intrusion into Indian airspace. Many Pakistani jets, fighter jets, including F-16s, entered India, especially the Jammu and Kashmir sector, tried to bomb few Indian locations, but they were repulsed by the Indian Air Force, which was on alert. This was the first dogfight between India and Pakistan since 1971. It was the first aerial dogfight between Indian and Pakistani Air Force, and both sides shot down one fighter jet each. Pakistan shot down an Indian jet, Indian MiG-21 was shot down, and an Indian pilot, Abhinandan, Wing Commander Abhinandan, was captured as a POW. He landed unfortunately in POK in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and he was captured by Pakistan as a POW. And he was returned the very next day, following negotiations between India and Pakistan. The captured Indian pilot was handed over back to India as a goodwill gesture. But the fact is the tensions were very high. India shot down a Pakistani F-16. All right? So tensions were very high, and since then relations have been completely broken between the two sides. We even suspended border trade. We closed all the connectivity and the trade that existed as a retaliation against Pulwama attacks. India ended its relationship, we downgraded the relations, cut off all trade and connectivity, and even launched airstrikes to punish Pakistan, and since then tensions have become even more intense. So essentially from 2016 there has been no improvement. All right? It's mainly because of terrorism. India also did something else. Along with the airstrikes and coercive diplomacy, we revoked the MFN status which we had given to Pakistan as per WTO norms. Under WTO, every country has agreed to provide MFN status to each other, to provide most favored nation status to each other. What does it mean? It means you will treat every country equally. When it comes to your trade, you will give equal treatment to every country. You'll treat every country as your most favored nation. Just like you would treat your most favored country, the same treatment will be given to every other country, so that it can promote fair trade. It can promote equal opportunities for every country, so that there are no unfair trade barriers for few countries. So to prevent such unfair practices that benefit few countries, WTO has a norm where every country should recognize the other as the most favored nation. India had respected this WTO obligation. We had given the MFN tag to Pakistan. But Pakistan, on the other hand, had never given the MFN tag to India. Please remember this. Pakistan had never returned this favor to India. But India, as a goodwill gesture, had given the MFN tag. But after Pulwama attacks, as India put diplomatic pressure and retaliated with airstrikes, we also cut off all economic relations with Pakistan, and we revoked the MFN status that had been given. The MFN tag was revoked by India, and border trade was suspended. And thus, India-Pakistan relations have been completely affected. Is that clear? So this is the current state of relations. All right. So let's stop our discussion over here. We have completed almost 90%. Is that clear? State of relations. All right. So let's stop our discussion over here. We have completed almost 90% of the chapter. In the next class, that is tomorrow, I'll